All right, continuing from where we left off last time. Last time we started or finished implementing the integration tests for one of our REST endpoints. I did go back and modify it a little bit to add some verifies to make sure our service was being called in the correct way. So you can see verifies kind of throughout here. I went in and added all the other integration tests for all the other REST endpoints. They follow pretty much the same example from this get-all. The post and put are a little bit more complicated in that we need to pass in entities containing our to-do lists that we're posting to the endpoint. But other than that, it's all pretty much the same. So yeah, everything's looking good here. And the build runs successfully. I did modify a couple things. I added this conflict exception mapper. So that way when my service throws a conflict exception, for example, if I add a to-do list with the same ID as one that already exists, and it throws a conflict exception, I'm now handling that, getting JSON back that I can process and verify in the integration tests. So I did that, add that. I did change both delete and put. I just changed this message very slightly. It used to say to-do list with ID, now it just says list with ID. So it's similar to the get one to make those consistent. So other than that, everything's looking good and implemented. Let's go ahead and check out what's been changed. All right, so we've got our new, I did add tests for those exception mappers as well. That's another change that I made. All right, so we've got our additional resources added and our additional tests added. All right, and we're all pushed up. So the next thing that we're going to do is add support for validation. So for example, when a to-do list is inserted, we don't attempt to do any kind of validation at all on this to-do list. So it might be possible for, or it is possible for someone to put HTML in here that launches scripts and things, which would be bad. Where they can put 1 million characters in here for the ID, which would be bad, could potentially break our database, things like that. So what we want to do is add validation on our objects, and we'll use Jakarta validation with Hibernate. It's the typical reference implementation of validation. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll start in the model objects. So we've got to-do list and to-do item. So we need to add Jakarta validation. Let's bring the browser over and go to Maven repository. Let's look for validation API. All right, so there's a couple things here. So we've got JavaX validation. This is the old one. You can see it hasn't been updated in a while. Jakarta validation is the new one, so that's the one that we're going to use here. 301 is the latest. Let's add that to our top level POM. Jakarta annotation, Jakarta WS. I guess V is before W, so we'll paste that in here. And then we will go into our models and add it here as well, without a version. And so this will, let's go ahead and update. So this should put the annotations, yeah, here's one, size. The annotation, the validation annotations we can now use on our fields to apply some constraints. So let's say max for an ID, let's make it 36 characters. And we'll set the message to to-do item ID max length is 36 characters. And we'll do something similar for a task. Let's make a task, well, maybe 200. And we don't really need any validation on our Boolean. It's either true or false, so nothing special there. And for our to-do list, let's do pretty much the same thing. To-do list, ID max length, and to-do list name max length. Okay. So now we have our constraints, and now we need to actually apply a validator for those constraints. So we need a validator implementation, which we can get from a validator factory. I forget what these classes are off the top of my head, but I guess first we need to bring this dependency into our REST API. So let's see, Jakarta WS. Okay. So let's Maven reload this. All right, so the only user input, or the only resources that accept user input, are post and put. So up here in post, we need a validation factory. I forget these classes. Let's Google search that real quick. So something like Java validation API. Okay, here we go. Bean validation. So I think this is the old, just because it mentions the word bean. Yeah, so this is the old one, Java X. But the concepts are going to be similar. We are going to need a validator implementation. We'll come back to that in a second. So they've got some example annotations here, just like we added size. So that makes sense. There are some more complicated ones like email, which we're not using. And you can do some things like specify annotations on your types. Okay, so this is what we're looking for right here. We need, I think I call it validation factory. It's validator factory. That was my problem. All right, let's make a private final. Let's put this here and make it just one line. Let's move that up. Okay. So now we've got a validator, and after we set the ID in our to-do list, we can validate it. So validator.validate to-do list, and this should return a set of constraint violations. Introduce local variable. Now, if we get some violations, that means the input that the user provided was invalid. So we need to turn these constraint violations into a bag request exception. If we have some violations, let's do violations.stream.map constraint violation.get message. We don't want the template, we want the actual message. And then we can join these like that. So this will give us an error message that we can put into a new bad request exception. Like that. Okay, so we can go ahead and test this just to verify that this is working. Let's open up our tests. Let's go into our post to do. Let's come down here. All right, so let's test validation error. So let's make our ID bigger than 36 characters. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think that was 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so it was only 9. So now we've got 10. 10, and 10. We'll make these C's, and then we'll make these D's. All right, so now we've got 40 characters in our ID, which is too big. So in theory, we should never actually get to the create because the validation will fail first. So we'll have a 0 here because our to-do list service .create method will be called 0 times. And it doesn't matter what the arguments are, so we'll put any's in there. Now our error response should be a bad request, and the message should say something like, to-do list ID max length is 36 characters. So we'll put that in there. We're not using this principal. I can see it's grayed out. So let's go ahead and run this. I'm expecting some errors here because we don't have, okay, here we go. No Jakarta Bean validation provider could be found. Okay, so what this means is we need to actually include a Bean validation provider like Hibernate Validator. Let's come over here and look. Hibernate Validator. So this is relatively new. 701 final is the latest. Let's copy that. Over here to our top level POM. So it was org.hibernate EFGH. I'll put it right here. And then we need it in our REST code. All right, we'll put it right here. All right, so now if I do a Maven reload, now I suspect we're still going to get problems because we didn't bring in any expression language. We're not actually using the expression language, but potentially we'll see problems from it anyway. Okay, here's our expression factory issue. So we don't want JavaX, we want Jakarta. Jakarta's the new one, so let's look for that. Jakarta L. So we don't want L API, we want actual L. So here's the Glassfish version, 402. Copy. Let's bring that in. Up here we have some Jakarta stuff. Oh, we actually want org.glassfish. Jakarta L. I guess it goes here. And we also want it up in our REST API. All right, we'll do that. Let's reload this again. And then run our test again. I believe that should be all the dependencies we need. All right, there we go. I see our Hibernate Validator info message. Well, we actually don't need to see that. So let's open up our test resources. And we'll put a warn there. Let's also add that line to our server fallback. All right. So that test looks good. We're not actually testing the name yet, but I'll add another test for that. Something else that I want is if we put HTML in there, I want it to be escaped. For example, let's test HTML. Let's turn this back to just ID or list ID. And let's make this something like HTML hello. Let's make it H1. Let's put an ampersand in there. I'm just making stuff up. Alright, so if we pass this in, I want these HTML characters to be escaped or encoded, and the same with this one. This is an HTML character as well. So the way that's normally implemented is by using commons text. Let's go find that. From Apache Commons, yeah, here's a commons text. 1.9 is the latest. Let's bring this in. So we need it in our top level POM. So org Apache. And let's bring it into our REST API. Let's reload our Maven to pick up that change. All right, so now up here in our post, we should get a, I think it's string escape utils. Yeah, here we go. So it also exists in Commons Lang 3, but it's deprecated. That's why it's got a strike through on it. But in Commons text, it exists. There should be an escape HTML. Yeah, there's actually a couple of them. There's HTML3 and HTML4. We'll use HTML4. And so we're going to have a line. Let me actually move this line up. So we're going to do something similar to this, except we'll do the name. Now we're expecting the name to not be null. Same with ID, at least on the post. Actually, on the put as well. So let me actually update these and put in not null. So we'll put it on the to-do item and the to-do list. Did I put that above or below? So let me actually move it above so that they're alphabetical. There we go. So we'll get some not null validation as well. Now, I'll also verify the size after I do the escaping, because the escaping is going to grow the length of the string. Okay, so let's set the name, and then we'll say unnullable to-do list.get name. Let's get rid of this stuff. And then we're actually going to map that through this method. And then we'll do or else null. So if null was passed in, we'll leave it null. If null was not passed in and we actually have a value in our name, then we'll map it through this escape HTML. And so after that, we'll do the validation. So if it was null, we'll get the null error. Actually, that reminds me, I should put a message in here. Or not name, task. Put some extra space in here and here. I might as well here too. Okay, So now we've got some additional validation tests that we can make sure are correct. So we added an HTML one. Let's test null values. So if I can either make it obvious that I'm passing null in here, or I can just not call these methods. I'll leave it like this, where it's obvious. And I'm going to leave this blank and let it tell me what the error message is. For this one, we're not actually going to get an error. We're going to get a valid response back, but this we'll have to verify that this HTML has been transformed. So let me come up here to our valid response example and paste that in. So we're going to get JSON back. We're going to get a result back. I don't care about the ID for this. So I'll just assert equals. So I'm expecting it to look like and LT H1 and GT hello and amp goodbye and LT slash H1 and GT. A little bit complicated, but that should be what it looks like. And we're going to have the course headers, and we need a principal. And I'm just going to say any result here, because we're doing the validation here, so that's probably good enough. Let's run all these. Actually, did I finish this one? Okay. So we're passing in the entity with the null values in the to-do. The ID, we're actually going to set a value on, so that one's not going to be invalid, even though we have the not null on it. But the name, we should get a not null error message. All right, so let's go ahead and run these. All right, so let's look at our HTML. So we actually got a 400 response back. I'm not sure why. I'll leave it like that, and let me check the, okay. So this I expected. That's the same message from our object, our to-do list object. Will that fit up here on one line? It will. All right, so this one, I'm not sure why it's failing, because it's not too long. The list ID is not too long. So let's actually put a breakpoint in here and then run this or debug this. All right, so we did get to our bad exception here. Let's come over here to our debugger. I'm not sure why we're not actually getting debug output. Maybe we didn't make it this far, or maybe we made it down to here. Let's do that. Okay, so we didn't actually get any violations. Our violations, we can see, are empty. So the 400 we got back was because, okay, our create method must have returned false. Let me go look and see what's going on over here. So we don't actually configure our mock here. So let's come back up here. What we need to do is we need, that line. And let's bring, oh, that's the wrong method. Let me move this up like that. Okay, so now when create's called, let's actually return true. And And now we should get our validation correct. So let's come back to our run all these again. All right, there we go. Everything's passing. All right, so we'll pause it here. What I'll do offline is do this same validation code in our put resource, and then I'll do the same thing in our item post resource and our item put resource, and then I'll update the tests in the same way to validate that everything looks good, or verify that our validation looks good is probably a better way to say that. And so yeah, thanks for watching, and like, share, subscribe, and all that, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.